Well, in the room, the reactions were very good. Of course, that's what we call sample selection bias. Who wanted to come hear me probably had some idea of what I was going to say. But the speech has resonated very widely around Europe. I've had a lot of positive reactions. Basically, I told the story of how the U.S. and its unipolar idea was the root cause of so many of the problems we have today, including the Ukraine war itself. And I also called on Europe to create a real foreign policy, not based on war, based on Europe's interests and its security, but not with the warmongering that was originally provoked by the United States. But now, even as Trump tries to find an exit ramp from this war, many European politicians continue the warmongering, which is really disappointing, although I think it will change.
It's interesting. I mean, we had this meeting yesterday in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, unfortunately not in Switzerland. We don't want to go into this now, but we had this agreement, the ceasefire. The Americans are delivering weapons. What do you think about these talks? What is your perspective on that?
Ceasefire is not the point, actually. The point is peace. The question is what else was discussed rather than what they have told us on the surface. If what came out of this is a 30-day ceasefire, but nothing more, it's not going to happen, actually. I think the Russians have said repeatedly there are root causes of this conflict. They need to be addressed in a serious way. I agree with that. This is the need for real diplomacy. A 30-day ceasefire means an invitation for starting again the war. What we need to know, and I don't know at this moment because it's one day after Riyadh, what else was discussed? Did the Ukrainians say, yes, neutrality, territorial concessions, because that's going to be part of any peace? What was really said? Presumably something more was said than a 30-day ceasefire. And perhaps what more was said is being communicated with the Russians by the Americans right now. So perhaps there was more progress than we know of. But as usual, maybe understandably, but in any event, as usual, we don't really understand to this moment what happened. All I can say clearly is if this is 30-day ceasefire without any more substantive agreement on the way to end the conflict, I don't think there will be a ceasefire.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Trump has made some remarks which could indicate that he shares your view on the root causes of this war. He said on several occasions, well, there are many people are guilty there, and I can understand that the Russians did not like the NATO expansion. What do you think? Do the Americans, does this government have a real perception of this war? Do they see clearly what is at stake? And is there hope for a thorough solution in a way that you have just indicated?
In this administration, there's a very high noise to signal ratio. Every day, contradictory statements are made about everything, whether it's tariffs on or off, whether it's about ending the war versus sanctioning Russia, whether it's about President Xi being best friends versus China being a perfidious country. It's a very high noise to signal ratio. Some people say it's a method. Some people say it's a confusion. Some people say it's a difference of views. To tell you the truth, I don't know what the reason is. I don't like this kind of governance of so much noise. I don't think the stock markets like it either. By the way, this is one of the conclusions. It's just a tremendous amount of uncertainty. Given that, it is not easy to say what's at the core of all of this. When it comes to Ukraine, I think there's enough material now, enough statements made by the president, made by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, made by the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, that suggests that the U.S. isn't going to invest in this war longer. They may prevaricate, they may threaten sanctions, they may do all sorts of things, but I personally find it pretty much unimaginable, for example, that Trump would go back to Congress and say, vote more money so we could send more arms. That, to my mind, is now beyond the politics. I may be wrong, but if that's the case, with all the noise, it's probably the case that this war is coming to an end. The reason it's coming to an end is without the U.S. support, Ukraine cannot fight on, period. And the idea that European politicians profess that, well, even if the United States stops, we will take on, this is ridiculous. It's not going to happen. So in this sense, I think the war is coming to an end. But I want to emphasize again, there's a lot of noise in this.
I mean, the deepest root cause of this war, it seems to me, is this great, if you want to call it, misunderstanding of the West towards Russia. I mean, after the victory in the Cold War, the Americans, the Europeans, they thought they shouldn't take seriously the Russian concerns anymore. They could expand more and more. They did things they would never accept in their own sphere of influence. So they didn't take the Russians seriously. And the Russians felt really threatened by this strategic expansion. And now the question is, has the American policy towards Russia really changed? Do you see the honest conviction on the side of this government, which praises itself as a total alternative to what we have seen before? Do you see the honest conviction that President Trump is really willing to find a solution to repair the broken relationship between the United States and the Russian Federation?
I think the way you put it is absolutely right, but I'd put it in even broader terms. The United States leadership thinks a lot of itself and thinks a lot of the United States. This has been true even before the end of the Soviet Union in 1991. The U.S. has always viewed itself as an exceptional country, meaning that it has an exceptional role in the world. When one of our secretaries of state wrote the history of the early post-World War II period, Dean Acheson entitled his book, Present at the Creation. That's actually, to my mind, says a lot. That's the American view. During the Cold War period, clearly there was a bipolarity in the world because the Soviet Union was a very powerful country. When the Soviet Union ended by dissolving into its 15 separate states, the U.S. arrogance went into overdrive. The U.S. said, this is a unipolar world. We're the sole superpower. We're the indispensable country. One quotation after another about how absolutely remarkable the United States is and how the U.S. leads the world and how the U.S. creates the rules-based order, never defining what the rules are, because the rules-based order means whatever rule the United States says the rule is. So this arrogance is astounding. It misses a basic point that the U.S. is 4.1% of the world population, and the other 95.9% of the world population is not thrilled to be led by 4.1% of the world population. And so the unreality of all of this has been true from the beginning. But now, with the spread of technology, with China's rise, with Russia's renewed power and technological capacity, we are truly, undeniably in a multipolar world. So the real question is, what is the the U.S. security state view of that new reality? Well, our Secretary of State actually said, yes, we are in a multipolar world. Believe me, that is an intellectual breakthrough for the United States of America government, even to utter that sentence, because Biden, to the end, lived in a dream world of the 1990s, the indispensable state, the leader of the free world, whatever high rhetoric one could imagine. At least that is diminished. The question is, what does it mean? Well, we're in very early days of this in a very noisy administration and a very, I think, confused one in many ways. No doubt the U.S. government, no doubt President Trump still greatly overestimates American power, by the way. Trump thinks, I close the U.S. market and the rest of the world is terrified. If they don't have access to the U.S. market, the world economy will collapse. No, Mr. President, the rest of the world will go on pretty much just fine, is actually the truth of it. But the Americans don't know that. Just like they thought, we're going to sanction Russia economically and bring the Russian economy to its knees. I tried to tell them, and no, that also is not going to happen. But they didn't listen. So there still is a lot of arrogance in the U.S. Maybe the arrogance is, well, there are three big powers right now, the U.S., Russia, and China. We ought to avoid each other's lanes so we don't have head-on collisions. That may be the view. Trump certainly still speaks a big imperialist line, but against small, weak countries. So he wants to take over Panama or take over the Panama Canal. He wants to own Greenland. He wants to make Canada, the 51st state. Canada's not so weak in that sense, but still, he's a bully in a lot of different areas. So this is not sweet talk. This is not let's sit down and work out a new global arrangement. There still is a lot of bullying, but maybe less bullying vis-a-vis Russia and possibly vis-a-vis China. There's a lot of bullying still in the Middle East. We own Gaza. We own it's Gaza Riviera. This nonsense talk is not good. It's not even remotely, in my view, tactically good from a deal-making point of view. It's just noise. And so the answer to the question is we're in an unstable period.
It's not clear to say whether it's enlightened bullying or just noisy bullying. Let's talk about the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. And the question is, how strong? Donald Trump likes to use the metaphor of cards. How strong are the cards? Yeah. Zelensky has no strong cards. How strong are the cards of President Trump vis-a-vis President Putin? I mean, can he now just put pressure and say, well, you know, we're sanctioning you, and there is a rather tough timeline, it seems to be, which is not a good idea in diplomatic talks, to say, okay, you have to immediately come to the negotiating table. How strong is the American position, is Trump's position towards Putin at the moment? Can he force him to come to the negotiating table and accept this kind of a deal which we see now emerging?
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a cliche, but I think actually, as I've thought about it in recent days, a reasonable cliche that the U.S. plays cards, basically poker, Russia plays chess, and China plays Go. So it's a kind of cliche, but when you think about it, what does it mean? Poker is a very interesting game. Partly it depends on what you're staring at when you're looking at your cards, and partly it's about bluffing. The Americans are full of bluffing. We got a great hand. We'll raise you. We'll bet the pot and so forth. There's, I don't know if I can say it, but there's a lot of bullshit in it. From a poker point of view. Chess is not like that. Chess, you're staring at the board, both sides. There's not bluffing. There are complex both tactics and strategy. It can be long, complicated games. Some play the end game, some play the middle game, and so forth. Go, which I don't play, I think is in a way even more variations and a slower game indeed. So the U.S. plays cards. It plays poker, and Trump talks in that imagery. Putin does not say what cards anyone has because they're not playing cards. Sometimes it's said, by the way, that Europe plays bridge, which I think could be right.
Probably
also.
an overestimation. I'm not sure whether that they know which game they're actually playing. If they're playing a game.
That may be true as well. So, does the U.S. have the cards? No. There still is a lot of bluff. There's a lot of bluster. The Russians are pretty methodical, and Putin's pretty careful, and they're pretty much going step by step. So the fact of the matter is, when Biden was full in and everybody was revved up for war and maximum sanctions and will defeat Russia, Russia was not defeated. Trump has basically said, we're not out to defeat Russia. So what are the cards? The cards are not that Russia can be pushed into a corner. What I do think is true is that there's a benefit from peace, but that means that not a 30-day ceasefire. That means defining what is a peace agreement. And here, I think it's pretty damn obvious, I have to tell you, because a peace agreement was essentially reached on April 15th, 2022. It was about to be signed. It defined that there were a few key issues. The most important was permanent neutrality of Ukraine. The second was territorial rearrangements. And the third was security guarantees. That's what's in the April 15, 2022 draft peace agreement. The United States and UK stopped that agreement because the idea was Ukraine should fight on, Russia should be weakened, America was going to raise the stakes. You know, this is the poker game. We're going to bring in HIMARS and ATACMS. We're going to toughen the sanctions. We're going to call Putin and raise the stakes. And it failed. About 1 million Ukrainians have been killed or seriously wounded since that time. And the situation is worse on the battlefield. And I think Trump has to know that, does know that, doesn't want to play Biden's losing hand. So, no, I don't think that there are ways to force Russia into a 30-day ceasefire, for example. But there are ways to reach a peace. And the peace involves permanent neutrality, stopping this NATO enlargement, which is a fundamental cause of all of this, understanding that certain territories are not going back. Ukraine's not getting back its 1991 border. And again, whatever anyone thinks about that, Ukraine didn't have to lose an inch had it played its cards, if I could put it that way, differently from 2014 onward. And security arrangements, we actually have a UN Security Council to make security arrangements, and that's the right place for that. So a deal could be reached that's in Russia's interest, that's in Ukraine's interest, that's in America's interest, that's in the world's interest, that's in Europe's interest. It could be reached pretty quickly. We still don't talk about that substance. Europe doesn't even talk about what it means when it says as long as it takes. If ever there was a BS phrase, that's it. What does it mean? Takes for what? The Europeans never explained it. The whole thing is to dumb down the discussion by using PR slogans like you would have a slogan for some brand. Just do it, or something like that. Do what? This is not a branding exercise. This is not a poker game. This is our world, and that needs a much more careful definition. And we don't have that to this moment.